No. Okay, good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're on tonight's council meeting in relation to our planning. There are copies of agendas which have been left on seats. You're more than welcome to share those. I don't think there's enough to go around. I do apologise. As you can see, they're very chunky tonight. We've got quite a few items to cover. Before I commence, I'll mention a couple of rules. Can you please switch your mobile phones off or put them on silent so there's no interruption? And there's also no dialogue between members of the gallery and the council during the course of proceedings. There are objectors and applicants who have requested to speak, and they've been listed, and I'll be calling them at the request of council when the items are for consideration. So having gone through that, I now declare tonight's planning meeting open. And the membership is as listed. We do have one apology for this evening. Councillor Williams, who's running late, she'll be here during the course of the evening, and Councillor Walsh is here, so we'll just note him as being absent for the moment. Next item, disclosure of conflicts of interest. Any conflicts of interest from councillors? No. There is not. I'll move on to item 4, confirmation of minutes of the previous planning committee meeting. Move Councillor McCarthy, second Councillor Cetus. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That item is carried. We now go to consideration of reports, commencing with Councillor Cetus.
Mr Mayor, with your indulgence, I would like the committee to consider moving on block the following items: 5.2, 5.4, 5.6, 5.7, 5.8, 5.9, 5.11, 5.12, 5.13, 5.14, 5.15 and 5.16.
Okay, Councillor Cetus has requested the following items moved on block. That means we'll do them all at once. 5.2, 5.4, 5.6, 5.7, 5.8, 5.9, 5.11, 5.12, 5.13, 5.14, 5.15 and 5.16. I will note also to my colleagues that there are no speakers for those items.
Sorry, can you just confirm, Mr Chair, if there's no speakers for the applicants or objectors for those items?
Objectors for those items.
Excuse me, please. I haven't been able to hear you.
Beg your pardon? All right, well, let's put this closer. Council's resolved to consider the following items on block: 5.2, 5.4, 5.6. Can you hear me clearly now? Yes. 5.7, 5.8, 5.9, 5.11, 5.12, 5.13, 5.14, 5.15 and 5.16. Councillor Cetus has moved. Do we have a seconder? Seconded Councillor Walsh. We have no speakers as objectors for these items. We do have several applicants who I understand have been spoken to by the planning department, and it's been agreed that if council decides to move those en bloc, they'll choose not to speak, and something to take up time. So we've had a mover and a seconder. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Cetus?
I think you give the explanation.
Okay. Any questions, or do councillors want any of those withdrawn?
Sorry, I just want to be clear, if I can, Chair. If I'm correct in understanding, by virtue of moving these en bloc, then the following motion would be to adopt the recommendations en bloc.
That is correct.
That's the only way that you're...
The recommendation as per each item will be moved. Councillor Villela?
Can we just confirm, because we have people in the gallery and sometimes we have misinformation that there is no one. Now that they've heard, that there's no one in the gallery as an objector for any of those that you've called out, Mr Mayor, just to be perfectly sure.
None have registered to speak, that's correct.
But if they are in the gallery...
They've got to register to speak, it's very clear, Councillor Villela.
Okay, I bring up, I've spoken to council, I bring up the verbal objection for D932.
Which one?
D932.
5.10.
That's being considered by the committee. So you'll be able to, if you've listed and have requested to speak, you'll be on the list. Okay? So I'll just go through those numbers again. The following have been moved en bloc by Councillor Seatis, seconded by Councillor Washington, to be considered as one whole item with the recommendation as per the report. 5.2, 5.4, 5.6, 5.7, 5.8, 5.9, 5.11, 5.12, 5.13, 5.14, 5.15 and 5.16. If there are no further questions, we have a recommendation there. All those in favour? Those against? Can I see those hands again, please? All those in favour of moving the items on block? Those against? We have a tie. I will explain again, councillors and members of the gallery, that council will be considering these items on block for the simple reason it's been brought to our attention that quite a few objections have been lodged without, I suppose, due consideration of the merit of our planning charter and
just
planning
point of order,
scheme.
Mr Mayor, I believe you've got to exercise your casting
I will
vote
do that once I've explained it.
without speaking to the actual motion.
All right, Councillor Lee. I will then use my casting vote to vote in favour of moving the items on block and hence raise my hand. So what council is now determined to do is to move those items as per the recommendation listed in the report. I'll now explain the reason why. Council has tonight received the highest amount of items for consideration in my 18 years on this council. It's been identified through an organisation that, with various reasons, to consider this approach, and unfortunately has taken up quite a lot of office time, resources and that of council as well. And also for the applicants, those who have not been dealt with under delegation. So as a result of identifying several items tonight, with no registered objectors to speak, council decided to move those items and therefore have been dealt with. So the recommendations for each of those items has been moved and supported by council.
We've already moved.
Just again, another point of order, Mr Mayor, I believe a separate motion is required for that.
Okay, right. I'll now put it to a vote because it's been moved on block. I'll put it to a vote. All those in favour of recommendation to vote on block, raise your hands.
No, we need a.
Oh, sorry. Next one is to move the officer's recommendation as per the item. Councillor Seatis is moved. Councillor Lawrence is seconded. All those in favour?
Sorry. There's an opportunity for councillors to speak in favour or against. Yeah, substantive, and I look forward to the opportunity before I vote.
Okay, go ahead, councillor.
Unless the mover
has moved.
I would just speak again. Well, I appreciate the point that you're making, Mr. Chair. I would say that some of the items that have been included in that list, I actually think do warrant further attention. And whilst they might have attracted what are considered not usual objections, there are objections to some of those applications that I think do deserve council's attention. I draw council's attention to item, the final item, 5.16, which is an application for 425 Plenty Road, Preston. It's for a 6-storey mixed-use development of 26 dwellings. It attracted 14 objections as a form letter objection, but it also attracted 9 objections that are substantive objections from nearby residents and businesses. And I think we need to take into account those sorts of applications and consider them, despite the fact that they have attracted objections from outside of the immediate area, because the proposal is in fact a significant deviation from what the planning scheme currently provides for, which is a 5-storey building, and in that case the proposal there is for a 6-storey. Now I take the point, there is no speaker listed to speak against it, but I think that there are merits to actually considering that one on its own and to making a decision in relation to that. Despite that, I'd also draw Council's attention to another application which has attracted 15 objections from nearby properties. That's at 10 to 12 Fordham Road Reservoir. I haven't heard from any residents directly regarding that, but I do note that there are 15 objections from nearby residents in relation to that one in Reservoir. And once again, it may be the case that I haven't heard from them because I'm not a councillor for the Reservoir area. So I would just ask that councillors give consideration to applications that have attracted a significant amount of objections from nearby residents before moving on bloc en masse. I'll leave it there.
I did ask Councillor McCarthy if there were some that councillors wanted withdrawn. I didn't hear any numbers mentioned. I did actually ask that.
Just before we finish that point then, Mr Chair, we've just been read out a list. We haven't had an opportunity to actually consider what is in that list, hence my reason to vote against the moving it on block. From a process
So which
perspective-
items would you like removed,
Well, I
Councillor?
think it's too late because we've got a live motion now.
Yeah.
It's too late. Councillor Vallola?
Mr Mayor, I'd like to speak against it. I think whilst I understand your rationale, I think we can set a very dangerous precedent here. In addition to what Councillor McCarthy has said, I think it is inappropriate to assume that they've come to council through a particular organisation, and that therefore, because there are no objectors, we won't listen to it. We won't hear the applications. I think we have done this before, and there'd be no objectors. We have to ensure, Mr Mayor, that the process that we conduct here in the chamber is fair, is appropriate, and that we don't establish some precedents tonight that can be exploited down the track. I think it's important. There is no illegal basis for not putting in an objection if you don't live in that area. We sought legal advice. So therefore, I think we as a committee need to do the appropriate thing and listen to each application and assess it on its merits once it comes to us. Although I understand the frustration that a lot of us feel regarding this particular campaign, I think we have to be careful not to react and not to undermine the process of a fair hearing here in the chamber, Mr Mayor. And I think the decision to come up with a list 30 seconds into the meeting lends itself to poor practice here in the chamber for the reasons that Councillor McCarthy has stated and the precedents and an intended one that it can cause down the track, Mr Mayor.
Any other speakers?
Mr Mayor, as a seconder, I'm quite happy to have the motion amended for 5.14 and 5.16 to be dealt with. Of course, obviously, the intent is not to get caught up in procedure, but to actually get to the objectors who've come here tonight.
Yeah, I think that's for my mind, Mr. Mayor.
Hang on. Mover happy to remove 5 point... We can't. We've voted.
Why are we debating it then?
Whether we can do that. We're dealing with a substantive motion. Yeah.
Put it to the vote, Mr Mayor.
We haven't put it to a vote now. A substantive vote motion's already been put. There was an opportunity beforehand to actually request those removed.
Okay.
They weren't considered. We've got the list in front of us. So now I'll put that to a vote to consider those items. Or people can still change their vote if they choose to do so.
Put it to the vote,
Okay.
Mr Mayor.
I'll put it to vote. All those supporting the moving of the recommendations as per the report, raise your hands. Those against? Okay, councillors, I'll now use my casting vote to vote in favour of the officer's report, officer's recommendation for each of those reports. Okay, so the items that we've dealt with, councillors, are 5.2, 5.4, 5.6, 5.7, 5.8, 5.9, 5.11, 5.12, 5.13, 5.14, 5.15, 5.16. Members of the gallery, those items have been dealt with. We'll now move on to the rest of tonight's planning agenda, commencing with 5.1 for 21 Hutton Street, Thornbury. Over to the officers.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This item is deferred from the last planning committee meeting, where the committee has asked for a commentary on a VCAT decision nearby at 109 Hutton Street.
before you, it contrasts the similarities but also the differences between the application for consideration now and that refused previously by VCAT. In a nutshell, what the previous application fell on was some very aggressive built form right through the property and much lower or smaller setbacks than is currently proposed in the current application before you. So the officers assessed that there are clear differences and the recommendation would stay the same when you look at that previous application. In fact, it reaffirms that this application subject to conditions is supportable.
Thank you for the officers. I will just confirm that there are no speakers for this item from the objector or from the applicant.
I'll move.
Councillor McCarthy.
If there are no questions, Mr Chair, I'll move an alternative recommendation to that listed in the agenda.
No questions from members of the committee. Councillor McCarthy, what's your
Thank you, and I ask councillors to bear with me. They have been, this motion has been circulated via email, but I'll read it out for the benefit of the minute taker. The alternative motion is that council refuse the application with the grounds as follows. 1. The proposal fails to comply with clause 22.04 neighbourhood character and clause 55.02-1 neighbourhood character, including the relevant precinct guidelines, D2 of the Darebin planning scheme, with specific regard to the proposal removes all trees from the site and fails to provide sufficient open space, adversely impacting the existing and preferred garden character for the area. The extent of development, the height, the bulk and the setbacks and the boundaries of the proposed building are not considered to respect the rear garden character of the neighbourhood, would unreasonably affect the amenity of neighbouring properties by way of visual bulk and would not be consistent with the existing or preferred neighbourhood character. The dwelling fronting Hutton Street is unacceptable in terms of scale, bulk and insufficient articulation. 2. The setbacks combined with the height and bulk of the development fail to meet the objectives of Res Code Standard B17, resulting in an unreasonable impact on the amenity of adjoining lots. 3. Garage constructed over the easement to the rear of the site is not acceptable. 4. Unacceptable open space provision for units 2 and 3, contrary to the objectives of Res Code Standard B28. 5. The development would result in unacceptable overlooking, contrary to Res Code Standard B22. And 6, the proposal is an overdevelopment of the site.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. We have a second, Councillor Lee. Councillor McCarthy has provided 6 reasons for refusal. Councillor McCarthy, do you wish to speak to those?
Look, I'll keep it brief, Mr Chair. The reasons are very clear. There are clear grounds here, specifically in relation to neighbourhood character, and then this is the first point that I conveyed to council, to planning committee. The premise here is that this is a case where we can take neighbourhood character very, very seriously. It is often said in this chamber that neighbourhood character is not a strong argument for refusal, but in this case we have 3 very clear sub-grounds to support the argument on the basis of inconsistency with neighbourhood character. And that neighbourhood character statement is council's own identified character statement in our own planning scheme. So we should be true to it. The second point is actually the immediate impacts on adjoining properties and in particular the amenity of adjoining lots by virtue of inconsistency with Res Code Standard B17. The key thing here is that not only does the neighbourhood character trigger a reason to refuse on that ground, but as a side effect of the height and bulk of the proposed buildings, they in fact create an unreasonable impact both in terms of the height and bulk, the visual appearance, but also the overlooking that results from that as well. And finally, and I'll make this point, and it's quite clear here, the open space provided is not consistent with Res Code provisions. We have seen developments with 2, 3 and even 4 dwellings on lots of a similar size that do provide sufficient open space, and that's certainly not the case here. So on that basis, I'm confident that council can mount an argument at VCAT if it came to that of refusal, but on this basis I'd argue that this evening we should refuse this application. It is not satisfactory and does not meet the standards that we have set in our own planning scheme.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lee, second, do you wish to add anything?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. A couple of comments I'd make in relation to this application. Unit 1 and 3 in particular, if you look at Unit 1, there is significant massing towards front of the property, towards Hutton Street, whereby the dominance of the character is dominated by the garage. as opposed to a simple driveway or a carport. So that certainly adds significant visual bulk to the front. That's departure from neighbourhood character. The other aspect is of significant departure is if you look at unit number 3, where there's double-storey development, adding significant overshadowing, overlooking into the adjoining property. And again, there is actually no setback from the property boundary to the garage of unit number 3. So on those two fronts alone, I think that fails significantly in terms of bulk mass and therefore contrary to the neighbourhood character, as Councillor McCarthy has said earlier.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Sedas, anything to add?
Are there 3 or 2 units, Mr Mayor? Just a point of clarification, because the blurb says 3, but when we look at the diagrams, it actually shows 2.
No, it shows 3.
3.
3.
It is 3.
Well, where's the third number?
3 by 2 stories.
It's a small one right at the back.
It is 3.
Wish the numbers would be clearer. Otherwise, my eyes must be taken.
Use the larger map, okay. If there's no further comments, I'll put that to a vote. The recommendation is there to refuse this application. All those in favour of the refusal, please raise your hands. Carried.
If we can have that
Those
vote
against?
as unanimous.
Councillor Sedas, did you vote on it?
Wrong one.
I'll put that to a vote again. All those in favour of the refusal, please raise your hands. Okay.
The alternative motion.
The alternative motion, yes. Okay, yes. I saw your hand go up, Councillor Sedas, okay? There are 3 dwellings there. Council has now issued a refusal for that item. The applicant will be notified of council decision and be given a 60-day right of appeal to VCAT. All interested parties of this matter will be advised of council's decision.
If we can have that noted as unanimous, please.
Yes, the minute take will note that as unanimous, okay? Item 5.2 has been dealt with. We now go to item 5.3, over to the officers.
Thank you, councillors. This is an application for a medium density development at 255,000 Darabin Road, Thornbury. It's proposed to construct a medium density housing development consisting of 3 double-storey dwellings on 1 and 2 facing Rathmine Street are reverse living, each with 2 bedrooms, while 3 facing Darabin Road has a traditional configuration with families in first type open space and 3 bedrooms at the first floor. Councillors, this application was advertised in the normal fashion, display of notice from the site and notices to neighbours, and as a result of that formal notification, 14 objections have been received. The objections are summarised on page 50 of the agenda. Councillors, our assessment of this application is that the proposal is supportable. We believe adequate open space has been provided, required car park provision, the dwellings present appropriately to the streetscape of Darabin Road and Rathmine Street, and we believe minimal impact will be caused to neighbours. Councillors, we recommend that a notice of decision be issued with conditions noted in the agenda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you from the officers. We have had 2 people requested to speak to this matter. We have the applicant's representative. If Dominic can join us, if you're here, Dominic, please take the chair to the front here on this front table. And you've got 5 minutes to present your case. And your time starts on the screen now.
I'll keep this pretty brief. I think you guys are obviously busy tonight. Good evening. My name is Dominic and I'm the applicant for the application of 255 Darabin Road in Thornbury. The development consists of 3 double-storey dwellings, as you've heard. The site is located on the corner of Darabin Road and Rathmine Street. It consists of 450 square metres. Throughout the application process, we've dealt with the council planners, if there's any concerns that they had prior to it being advertised. Throughout these discussions, we reached agreement that we believe there will be minimal impact on the neighbouring properties as a result of our extensive efforts to communicate with these matters. The development is in line with Council's land use strategy, and the site is perfectly situated for such a development, and it meets the directives and objectives of this land use strategy. There are many examples within the vicinity of the site where there are other corner developments such as this. The development also meets Council's housing strategy, in which we're providing a diverse stock of housing, which we once again work extensively with the planners to reach a level of compliance with all the clauses in the planning consent. There are no overlooking issues due to the development is located towards Rathmine. There are minimal walls on boundaries abutting adjoining properties. Overshadowing is minimal and site coverage is below the required standard, which provides for a greater landscape and disturbance yard areas for the reverse living dwellings. Car parking has been provided in accordance with relevant standards, etc., etc. The subject site's within an incremental change area, which also states that residential areas of transitional character, which with already existing mixed dwellings, which we have here, reasonable access to local services, and are mostly unaffected by heritage issues. These housing changes areas provide the community and the development sector with great certainty about the envisaged level of residential change to be expected in this environment. Must be noted that the objections received are frivolous. There were, I believe, 13 objections. 11 of those consisted of the same objection, just with different addresses, etc. And it's very disappointing that this matter has been delayed for many, many months as a result of these frivolous objections. This application should have gone to delegation and been decided by council officers and should have been resolved a lot quicker. We should have moved on from this application and not waited for such a meeting to determine such a straightforward application. The application has always had the support of the planning officers, and it's disappointing that I'm here wasting my time and your time, councillors, with this matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If you can resume your seat in the gallery. We now had an objector requested to speak, so Joseph Seven, if you're here, Joseph, if you can take the chair at the front here, please. And you've also got 5 minutes to present.
The main point of my objection is that the size of the block is quite small. Bit of background, I live on the adjoining property to 57 Barry Road, and the area is an older area with older established buildings. I believe that putting 3 units on a block this size would create too much high density housing and be out of character for the area. I do also believe that more than 60% of the block has been developed. The plans weren't straightforward in showing measurements and also how much of the block was going to be used. Also, I wanted to talk about the heavy mature vegetation that is in the area. I understand he has talked about retaining some of this, but from looking at the plans, it's noted that it would be most of those vegetation would have to be removed in order to deal with those units. I also have an objection to the obscure glazing. The top halves of the house, the top halves of the windows were not actually going to be obscured. And I was also going to talk lastly and just quickly about the traffic. Parking is also an issue in the area, especially on Rathbone Street. With these 3 units, it will become a lot worse. So I think there is good vision for parking.
That's it, Joseph, you're finished? Thank you. If you can resume your seat in the gallery. Okay, we've heard from the officers and the applicant's representative and also an objector. Over to the councillors. Any questions to our officers? Councillor Lawrence.
Mr Chair, we just heard a statement from the objector that the site coverage was over 60%, but I'm reading the report stating the site coverage is 42%. Could I get some commentary from officers about those two figures?
Councillors, the site coverage that's noted in the report on page 6 is 53%.
The wrong report. Okay.
Page 53.
63. Okay.
53.
Yeah, sorry, my error. So it is over 60%.
No,
53.
So, just
Councillor Lee.
just follow on from that. So, the plan that we've got, plan 3 or 5, where it says site coverage is, oh my apologies, so hard surface area is 46%, 53.2%. I got it now. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from councillors?
Just through
Councillor
the
McCarthy.
Chair, just in relation to the local area, can I just get an indication from officers about what level of reverse living we actually have in place in that immediate precinct? Because I don't recall that this is a precinct that we've identified for reverse living arrangements.
Councillor, I'm not aware of which particular sites, if any, immediate area.
If I can go a next step in relation to that question, would it be correct to say that our own neighbourhood character study does not encourage or support or specify reverse living as the dominant form or a preferred form in that area?
Councillor, it stays silent on the reverse living component. Reece Code clearly provides it as an option for open space. What we do as officers is we attempt to provide service yards as well as the reverse living arrangement. It's clearly an option available to an applicant when proposing a medium density development.
Councillor Greco?
Given the size of the block and nearly 450 square metres, and we're looking at three units, can we get a sense of what the size of the rooms are going to be like?
The reverse living option, Councillor, provides, well, there's a couple of things here. The site is a corner site, so it provides some flexibility in terms of what we're able to construct on the site. The room sizes, there is no minimum room size for a bedroom stipulated in any regulation, but just looking at the plans, the room sizes exceed what would normally be a minimum of 3 by 3, so they exceed that dimension. And the terrace area, particularly for dwelling 2, exceeds the minimum in Reece Code of 8 square metres, which is 9.03 square metres. So, in answer to your question, there's no minimum for a bedroom size, for example, but these bedrooms would be to exceed the 3 by 3.
Okay, if there's no further questions, we have a recommendation there. Someone move the recommendation. Councillors?
If there are no one speaking for the recommendation, I have an alternative recommendation, Mr Mayor.
You have an alternative recommendation, Councillor Lee?
Certainly, Mr Mayor. The application will be refused on the following grounds. It fails to meet the following standards of the Darebin Planning Scheme in relation to 1, street setback, 2, overlooking, 3, wall on boundaries, and number 2, reverse living is contrary to the preferred neighbourhood character of the area as it is outside a major activity centre.
I'd like to second it with a proposed amendment if I can, Mr Mayor. The proposal's over-reliance on reverse living.
Yes.
Can I just check before the mover or seconder speaks to that? Yep. I didn't quite catch all the points. Was there any reference to citing in relation to ground of refusal?
In citing in terms of
inconsistency with Council's neighbourhood character study?
Yes. The reverse living arrangements are not in the preferred neighbourhood character. It's inconsistent with neighbourhood character as it is outside a major activity centre. Okay. That's the linkage between reverse living and a major activity centre.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a move for refusal. I move Councillor Lee, second Councillor Cedars. Okay, Councillor Lee.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I just draw attention to councillors to the report in relation to Clause 55 assessment. It does surprise me there is a number of areas where it does not meet the actual standard of our planning scheme, and they are not insignificant when you look at things like wall on boundaries and setback. But when you do add those little non-compliances with the standard, they do add up to a significant departure from the preferred neighbourhood character. The reverse living, while I'm not a fan of it, I also recognise that it is within the planning scheme a legitimate form of design and layout. However, our council policy clearly says where we will support reverse living is where the development occurs in a major activity centre. And as far as I know, this area is not in a major activity centre. If this is right in the middle of Station Street down Fairfield, then that probably get a better chance of being supported. But this being so far up north towards Darebin Road, where it is outside of the major activity centre, I think to have that reverse living in place, I think is contrary, therefore, to the neighbourhood character. And therefore, using that reverse living arrangement, as Councillor Sid has said earlier, in order to maximise the yield on the site, I think it therefore represents an overdevelopment of the site.
Before the seconder speaks, this reverse living aspect has drawn a bit of attention in debate tonight. I might just ask the officers in relation to VCAT's view on what reverse living actually is. Do they have one or not?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This has been referenced a few times in council reports to the planning committee, particularly in regard to council has raised the same grounds as Spring Street corner, Spring Street and Regent Street. And Member Chimeno, the VCAT was quite critical of that particular ground. And really, in a policy sense, Mr. Mayor, I feel advised the council that there's no real difference in the policy context. It says whether reverse living is a good or bad for this site compared to the one that the tribunals. No, that's the tribunal series there. And the officers consideration for you is the planning scheme as the rest.
Thank you. Before the seconder speaks, Councillor McCarthy, another
I'd
question?
just like to propose a different set of words to Councillor Lee and Councillor Cetus that might be more palatable in the context of the advice we've just heard, which would simply be that the point that refers to reverse living be changed to reverse living does not form part of the neighbourhood character of the area.
I'd seen replacing that in total.
Replacing the point about that the development relies overly on reverse living, to instead reframe that as reverse living does not form part of the neighbourhood character of the area.
Yes.
Less qualitative.
I don't accept that, and I can explain my reasons
Well,
why.
it's the mover.
If it's not accepted, then that's fine. That's fine.
It's not accepted?
Yeah.
Okay, right. So that's out.
Just if I can
Seconder.
take my speaking rights now, and it does follow on from Councillor McCarthy's attempt to dovetail with Mr Rudd's advice, but similarly also with Mr Rollis's. In as much as that we don't have a fixed position within the MSS, allows us then the discretion to determine where and when it occurs, as Councillor Lee mentioned in his speaking to the motion, but in addition to finessing where we believe, for instance, that there's an undue reliance or an overly reliance associated with a given proposal on reverse living to actually support the yield in question. Now, I've got a particular problem, and I mentioned about a couple of weeks ago when we had an application before us on Darebin Road, and reluctantly supported that proposal in that instance, and cited the fact that it was on a corner block. But it cannot be always a given that we will support reverse living arrangements in all instances. The fact of the matter is, it does act as a detriment over time to a significant proportion of our population who will not be able to use those houses. That's fact. That's elderly and people with disabilities and other mobility issues. We have supported reverse living applications before this council in other areas, and they have been rather small proposals, and I emphasise that. So where do we draw a line? This is a point of distinction, Mr Mayor, where I believe drawing a line is appropriate. It strikes me that, given the fact that the proposal is cited on a corner block, it could have done a lot better than simply rely on reverse living in order to get the yield. So I think in that circumstance there was a bit of a missed opportunity in terms of the internal design to get the yield that they wanted, but not relying on reverse living arrangements. And I think, again, I go back to my point to conclude, our MSS allows us some flexibility and discretion to determine where and when. I think that the block in itself is tight, and therefore you've got the outcome that's before us, councillors, and on that basis I can't support it.
Thank you, Councillor Cetus. Any other speakers? Councillor McCarthy?
Look, I just would follow Councillor Cetus's point, and the only reason why I make reference to neighbourhood character is just to be more specific to the what is actually in place at the moment, which is Councillor Lee's point, which is this is not a major activity centre. It is not an area that we have designated for variations to the common form in that way. The other thing I think that we need to keep in mind as well is that this is through the conditions that have been proposed by officers really having to be massaged into compliance, and I think there's a problem here when we have these sorts of applications come to us, and it didn't, whilst this didn't reach the benchmark from the, I think I understand from the local objectors, I'm glad it did come to us because it is not, as far as I can see, an example of where we should make an exception on those sorts of grounds, and therefore on that basis I'm inclined to support the motion of refusal.
Okay. There's Councillor Greco.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, look, I'm going to speak in favour of the alternate motion, principally for the reason when I looked at the land size, and I think it was mentioned by the objector, we're talking about a block that's just under 450 square metres. That's relatively small. And when we think about that there's 3 dwellings on that, that would be the equivalent of trying to put 6 dwellings on a normal standard block between 800 and 900 square metres. So when you think of it in those terms, you clearly could see how it really becomes an overdevelopment and contrary to the neighbourhood character. And so on those grounds, I'm not willing to support the application and instead support the alternate motion. I would make a request for the mover and the seconder to add an additional point to the alternate motion, stating that it represents an overdevelopment of the land.
Yes.
Mover, happy with that? Seconder too? Yep. Okay, so an additional point there.
Yep.
They're the speakers. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I'll speak against the alternative motion. I am aware there's people planning 4 units just very near this location, which is obviously overdevelopments. In relation to 3 units, I'm not sure council's grounds for objection are very fruitful and hanging our hat on reverse living when obviously it is an allowed built form. And I also would say a better grounds for objecting to this would be in relation to garden character of the area. But again, I'd like to see some council policy suggesting that we're going to preserve garden character along a bus route. And I'm not aware of that, given our preference on development on transit routes. So I just think it is in Northcote, and yes, they don't have 800 square metres like Reservoir, so it's obviously a different density to Reservoir.
Okay, if there's no further speakers, I'll put that to a vote for the alternative recommendation as per the report to refuse the application. Did you want to close the vote?
Do you want me to read it out again?
Yes, hear it again, Councillor.
Yes, that the application be refused on the following grounds. 1, it fails to meet the following standards of the Darebin Planning Scheme. A, 55031 B6, street setback. B, 55041 B17, side and rear setbacks. C, 55042 B18, wall on boundaries. And D, 55046 B22, overlooking. 2, over-reliance on reverse living arrangement fails to respond to the preferred neighbourhood character of the area as it is outside a designated major activity centre. And 3, represents an overdevelopment of the site.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we've heard enough on that. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour of the alternative recommendation? Those against? That's carried. Okay, council has decided to refuse that application. All interested parties, the 3 immediate objectors will be notified, as will the 11 outside objectors be notified of council's decision. The applicant will be advised of council's decision and be given 60 days of appeal rights to go to VCAT and challenge council's decision. Next item of consideration was 5.4. That's been dealt with. That was a refusal, anyhow. Next item is 5.5, the application for planning permit at 704 and 706 Gilbert Road in Reservoir. Over to the officers.
Councillors, this is an application for a medium density development at 704 706 Gilbert Road, Reservoir. It is proposed to demolish existing dwellings and construct 10 dwellings, 8 double-storey and 2 single-storey. Dwellings 1 to 8 have 2 bedrooms at ground level and kitchen meals living areas to the first floor, with golfing is 8 square metres to 10.4 square metres. Dwellings 9 and 10 will have 1 bedroom each, with ground level secluded by available space of approximately 25 square metres. Dwellings 9 and 10 single storey, and the remaining dwellings are double storey. Councillors, this application is advertised in the normal fashion. Notice on site, notice to adjoining owners and occupiers, and as a result of that notification, 17 objections have been received in the community. The grounds of objection are summarised on page 86 and 87 of the agenda. Council is aware of the view that the proposal is supportable, that a notice of decision should be issued with conditions. The officer in particular has made an attempt to improve on the size of service yards for particular dwellings and has done so by a condition on the approval that's before you. It is also relevant to note that the site is in proximity to Gilbert Road Commercial Street further north. The site has a carriageway to the north, a right-of-way to the east, and a right-of-way to the south. And that siting, that context, provides some immediate buffering for the immediate neighbours. Councillors, we recommend that a notice of decision be issued with the conditions noted.
Thank you very much, Peter. For this item, we've actually got several objectors who've requested to speak. We've got Carmela, Elizabeth and Rebecca. There's 5 minutes between you guys. So if you all want to speak, there's about a minute and a half each or thereabouts. So, yes? Okay, fine. Okay, so Carmela, are you here, Carmela? Yeah, okay, you can... Yeah, that's fine. Well, if you'd like to come join us at the front here, you've got two and a half minutes to present your case. To which one, sorry? 45 Willis Street, 5.2. That's been dealt with. That's gone. Well, I didn't understand what you said. I had an objection that I wanted to present about the fence. You haven't been... About the wall. I registered my... I'm sorry, you'll have to take up with the officers. That matter's been dealt with. So the matter we're dealing with now is 5.5. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's been dealt with. I'm sorry. No more dialogue. I'm sorry. You have to take up with the officers tomorrow. So 5.5, Elizabeth or Rebecca? The officers tomorrow morning. Ring up just ring up the council. They'll put you through to the planning department. I'm not sure exactly which one. Okay, okay. The officers will assist you tomorrow when you're in through. So Elizabeth or Rebecca for 5.5. If you got one of you guys want to take the chair at the front here, please. Is Carmela here too, or not? I beg your pardon.
What's my point of register? Mr. Chair, I think we have a serious problem, Mr. Chair. Yeah. I think we have a serious problem.
We've got a problem here.
We do.
No, that's an issue we now need to deal with.
Have we made a mistake, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, we made a mistake.
We made an error, Mr. Mayor.
What can we do?
Wait.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question through you to our officers, which they might be able to just consider while you're getting advice? The question relates to 5.2, which I understand was one of the items that was moved on block earlier with the recommendation adopted. Councillor Villela asked at the time, and I also asked whether there were any objectors who wish to speak.
The list has been circulated to councillors today,
right,
councillor,
right. Thank you.
and the name isn't there.
That's fine. I'm not having a go. I'm asking from a process perspective. 2 councillors asked whether there were any objectors in relation to that item. The information that you had, it appears, Mr. Mayor, is incorrect, and I'm not blaming you. What I'm asking is a process question, which is that the item was moved on block, regardless of whether councillors voted in favour or against that. From a natural justice point of view, is Planning Committee in a position to rescind the decision it made this evening in relation to that item, so that the objectors are afforded the opportunity to speak to their objection at the next Planning Committee meeting? Because otherwise, I would ask the question that Planning Committee is not complying with its own charter and its own regulations. So I would ask whether Planning Committee is able to rescind the decision in relation to 5.2 and have that heard again and allow the objectors that have come here this evening with the understanding they'd be speaking to their objection the opportunity to do so and make their case to the Planning Committee. And that would occur in a fortnight's time. We can't rescind a motion now, as far as I understand, but we can do it
Well, anyway, that item will need to be considered at a later date, I believe, if there's an intent to rescind, if we're able to do so, because the applicant's representative has left, so he can't speak to the matter. So can I suggest at the conclusion of tonight, councillors, if they can or able to, and we'll get advice from our officers, to rescind that item for consideration again, Mr CEO, okay? Yep. So just for the benefit of members of the gallery, council can consider, if we're allowed to, under the charter, to rescind that item and have it come back to council for reconsideration, due to an error from our officers.
Mr Mayor, I'm sorry, I had to leave the chamber, but have we apologised to the residents in the gallery who have been inconvenienced?
Again, an apology would be a very detailed apology.
From yourself, Mr Mayor, and, you know...
On behalf of the council and our officers, I apologise for the error, and this will be sorted out, I think, Mr CEO.
And also, I think we assume, Mr Mayor, that everyone knows what's going on.
Now, Councillor Villala, we'll go on 5.5, okay? So we'll consider that item afterwards. Okay, over to you, Elizabeth, is it? Thank you. Your time starts now.
I'm speaking regarding concerns impacting residents of 708 Bradley. We feel that the placement of the full garage and the multi-use is excessive.
Thank you. Excuse me. If we can have some silence in the gallery, please. Thank you.
The design has cars backing in and out of garages into directions of the dwelling entrances, bedroom windows, resulting in increased noise, car emissions and safety concerns. While the change in use of the shared drive is expected, it should not come at our expense or detriment. Vehicle access from this entry point is not strictly necessary for this development, given the site has ample alternative options along the whole of the east and south boundaries. Having use of garage doors is not an acceptable design response aesthetically, as claimed in your report, and using alternative options would actually reduce the overall number of crossovers to this site. According to the report, the development fails to meet several of its standards and no objectives, yet the recommendation is to grant the permit with 30 conditions, none of which specifically address our objections. With regard to site permeability, the proposal clearly does not meet council standards, given that it is imposing a condition about this. There is already a high concentration of impervious surfaces along the north boundary, which currently experiences drainage issues during heavy rains. We expect the addition of building mass and hard surfaces from this development will only lead to an increase of stormwater runoff, and there's been no provision to minimise the potential damage in the proposal. Other considerations about insurance and public liability issues that may arise have not also been considered. This proposal is out of character for the development style of subdivisions in the immediate area. The overall layout is very congested, with very poor on-site amenity. This includes 4 dwellings that are located in the middle of an alley. Dwelling 5 is the closest to the street, being Gilbert Road, at a distance of 23 metres. These dwellings are not visible or easily identifiable in the location and fail to provide a sense of address with no surveillance and limited lighting to address safety issues. Dwelling 9 and 10 have no front access for placing waste bins out for collection. These residents will need to walk their bins the length of the alley where lighting is not provided, or walk them through their house to get them out to the street. There is no proposed enclosure for cars parked in the southeast corner of the alley, which is prone to graffiti. Access to the bus stop directly in front of the site will be compromised and present a hazard to commuters on collection day with the significant increase of waste bins. The design approach of the subdivision is driven to maximise dwelling yield rather than achieve a high level of quality, comfort, safety and cohesion in the overall physical outcome for the site. We feel that an alternative during construction. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. If you can resume your seat in the gallery, we will now go to councillors to ask questions of our officers. Over to you, councillors. Any questions? Councillor Lawrence.
Just a question to officers, more generally about intensity of development in this corridor. Council considered intensification along Gilbert Road and didn't go down that path. I'm just struggling to see how this application fits with those strategic decisions Council had in relation to development on Gilbert Road.
Good point.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, Councillor Lawrence is correct. The intensification which is expressed in the housing strategy and in the MSS framework plan shows that up to Regent Street's an area where Council may contemplate a high density. North of Regent Street, it's not. You're getting back to its accessibility to shops, services, transport.
Okay, thanks for that. Any other questions? Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, the objector, one of the points that I took note of from the objector was about the potential of issues around waste collection, and the fear is that they would have to walk it through walk bins through the homes. Is that are you confident that would not be the case, or?
Councillor, the officer assessing the application certainly considered the waste collection and the proximity of the bins to service collection points. The opinion was formed that it was still a workable option. Yes, in some instances you will have to walk the bins slightly further than other dwellings, but still within an appropriate distance based on our calculation. So you don't have to walk the bins through the homes. That was noted earlier.
Okay, Peter. Any other questions from councillors? We have a recommendation now, otherwise?
Mr Mayor, I have an alternative motion.
Can we hear that, Councillor Dwyer?
Yes, thank you. The proposal is refused on the following grounds. It's fairly lengthy, so just bear with me, please. The proposal does not respect the existing or preferred neighbourhood character and is not consistent with clause 22.04 of the Darebin planning scheme with regard to A, the insufficient street setbacks are provided to allow a meaningful front garden space. B, insufficient landscaping is provided to maintain and enhance the landscape character of the area. C, dominance of upper levels does not respect the single-storey residential built form of the area. D, rhythm of spacing between dwellings. Number 2, the proposal is inconsistent with the objectives and standards of clause 55 of the Darebin planning scheme with regard to A, does not respect the existing or preferred neighbourhood character. B, insufficient setback. C, insufficient landscaping opportunities are provided. D, insufficient private open space is provided for the expected recreational and service needs of the occupants of the dwellings. E, the proximity of the access ways to ground floor habitable room windows result in poor internal amenity due to vehicular noises. And number 3, the proposal is inconsistent with the requirement of clause 52.06 of the Darebin planning scheme as no visitor car parking spaces are provided.
Thank you, Councillor Villala. And Councillor Lawrence interrupted while you were speaking as seconder. So, Councillor Villala, over to you if you wish to speak to it.
Oh, look, I think the extensive deficiencies that I've just read out, Mr Mayor, speak for itself. even though I appreciate that the officers have put in, require or conditions, it's just there's also the issue around parking, and overall it is just you put all that together and it might just get on the line. It really is, I think, overall a deficient application. I think a bit more needs to be done, and we are talking a significant development site. I think, more work needs to be done for it to be responsible and sustainable development. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Villar. Councillor Lawrence, anything to add?
Yes, Mr Mayor. Look, this, personally, I would have liked to have seen greater densification along Gilbert Street all the way up to these shops to support economic development, but that wasn't the strategic decision of this council. And I think it is important that our statutory decisions are actually in line with our strategic ones. In that, those strategic decisions talk about the preferred character of this area. So this isn't a Plenty Road, St George's Road or High Street treatment. We've made that decision. We've kind of killed off the tram extension forever, but we have made that decision, and this development exceeds that preferred character.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any other speakers? Councillor Sedas.
Yeah, I'd like to speak in favour of it. I mean, we just had dealt earlier in our meeting, Mr Mayor, at the application in relation to Darebin Road. If you took it purely on the numbers, we were close to 70% in that application that we had rejected. This one almost totally relies on reverse living to support the offerings before us. I mean, it's just, you're going from one extreme to another. And it's not surprising then that, notwithstanding the fact that you're playing with two sites ostensibly, you still get the constraints, because it needs to rebalance that which it wants in terms of the yield with having your living arrangements perched on the ground floor level, and your essentially open plan area of kitchen meals living on the upper floor. I mean, we did talk about a pluralism of housing that may yet be implicit within the MSS, and I think perhaps because it's not exactly the forum before us, Mr Mayor, but it may well be that we revisit the MSS and actually spell out these kind of internal aspects to support our propositions as to when we draw the line to say yes or no to these sorts of designs. As I said before, we haven't taken a doctrinaire position that in each instance reverse living is a negative vote of this council. But here we've got an overdevelopment plus an over-reliance, proof positive of 80% of the proposed dwellings being reverse living. And for that matter, for that reason, I just can't simply support it.
Thank you, Councillor Sedas. Councillor Gregor.
Yeah, look, I like to support the alternate motion also. Yep. I think the alternate motion is very detailed. And why it's very detailed, because if you look at this application, it just fails on a whole series of steps. I mean, we're not talking about one or two items that then can be adjusted in order to fit within the envelope. We're talking of many items that have not met the test, or have been pushed in to try and meet the test. But I think it's a bursting envelope, to say the least. I would just add a further ground for the refusal, and that's the ground that we've just spoken about now, is that it represents an overdevelopment due to its visual bulk.
Thank you, Councillor Gregor. If there's no further speakers to this one, I'll put that to a vote. The vote is to refuse this application. So I'll ask for a raise of hands. All those in favour? Carried. Councillors, I'll advise that...
Mr Mayor, that it's unanimous.
Councillors, I'll just inform the gallery now that Council has refused that application. The applicant will be notified of Council's decision and will have his decision to appeal to VCAT with 60 days once he receives our notification, and all interested parties, objectors, will be told of Council's decision as well. So we'll go to Council and defend our decision to refuse that item. If you want to go, you can leave, otherwise you can stay for the remainder of tonight's agenda. Okay, items 5.6, 7, 8, 9 have been dealt with. We now go to item 5.10, which is application for 73 Seston Street Reservoir. Over to the officers.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This application seeks approval for the development of a two-storey building containing 3 dwellings. Each dwelling contains 2 bedrooms and a single carport. The dwellings all have open space provided at the ground floor level in compliance with the planning scheme. The subject land has an area of 645 square metres and is located within the residential growth zone. This is where medium density is actively encouraged and recently rezoned as part of Amendment C of 147. I'll draw the committee's attention to page 166 and 167, where there's an analysis of the application against the new design development overlay in 19, which relates to the Northland Urban Renewal Precinct. The application has been advertised with 15 objections received. The grounds of objection and the officer's response to the concerns raised. That is detailed on pages 163 and 164. The report before the committee concludes that this proposal achieves a high level of compliance with the planning scheme. Accordingly, the application is recommended for approval.
Thank you, Darren. Now, we have a request from one objector to speak here this evening, Bruce Munro. Thank you, Bruce. If you can join us in the seat at the front here. And when you're ready, you've got 5 minutes.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for the opportunity tonight. The lady who lives at number 71 Seston Street has asked me to represent her due to her work commitments today. Her objections to the proposed works at number 73 in its present form are as follows. Number 1, lack of sunlight. There already is a large double-storey building to the rear of her block. This proposed new work in the adjacent property will further reduce any natural sunlight on her property. Now, for those who have the booklet here, if you study the shadow diagrams, you'll note that in all 3 of them, and I know it doesn't show this on the plan, but where she hangs out her clothes to dry, that area now is going to be, it appears to be in permanent shadow the whole time. So that's, obviously, if you look at the shadow diagram, so you need to close that on the north side of number of her property, which is the adjoining one at number 71. So you can see there's a half shade area there, and it'll be...
Drawing number 9, we've got that.
Okay. Number 2, congestion. Seston Street in this part of Reservoir is a small cul-de-sac that's like a little dead-end street. Any extra cars will spill out onto the already crowded street. One only has to drive down Summerhill Road to see cars parked outside other dual or triple occupancy dwellings in this area. And finally, number 3, the amenity of the area. The lady's dwelling is on a previously divided block, which is of similar size, which was of similar original size before it was divided, to number 73. Number 73 will now have a 50% increase in dwellings on it. And if you look at those pictures there, you can see how the towers above the front view is from Seston Street. You can see how it towers above the buildings either side of it. And I might just ask Council if this is going to be the new norm at this level of density. Sure. So thanks for any consideration given to what I said tonight. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Bruce. You can resume your seat in the gallery. Okay, over to councillors. Do we have any questions from councillors? Councillor Williams?
I am slightly curious, as I don't know if the other councils have picked up on it, but it does imply that there's definitely no any conditioning. I know it's not a... I just think it's bizarre being a new property that they're not installing air conditioning or a split system or anything like that.
Yeah, it's still going in the conditioning system here if they do put them in, and actually something requires the mentoring, so depends what we're interested in is their location and their impact on neighbours, so that's still a requirement for one, but yeah, it's certainly an optional bidding, but we're not one that prefer to have people.
So,
Councillor Lawrence.
Just a question to the Chair, to the officers. Just to refresh my memory, this is in, is this in C, the area of C147?
It is, Mr Mayor.
The only planning amendment we've had passed?
It's, we say 144 passed, but that wasn't what council asked for. It's 147, it's in the residential growth zone, which is an action of the Northland Urban Renewal Plan and part of the Latrobe Employment Integration.
So, just a supplementary through that, the objectors noted a dual development next door. That's been a common pattern through this neighbourhood. In C147, is this built form conforming with the built form in C147?
Mr Mayor, it's on the low side of what you can expect in the future. The area is in transition, and the design and development overlay does contemplate forms up to 3 stories.
In this street?
Any other questions from councillors? Not, we have a recommendation there.
Mr Mayor, I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Okay, we have a mover, Councillor Lawrence. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Setis. Councillor Lawrence, you wish to speak?
Yes, yeah, Mr Mayor. This development is, was asked, is this the new norm? And yes, this is the new norm. Dual locks won't be generally the pattern in C147 because C147 area, the council's earmarked for greater intensification. And as officers indicated, that built form actually can be up to 3 stories in some of those corridors. There's half a dozen streets, I think, that are affected by that. And that's been a deliberate policy of council to speed up development in this corner, which has got very little development. I'd invite councillors to drive around the streets there. There's quite a few vacant blocks, and developers and individuals have had trouble just doing dual locks there and making the numbers stack up just to build 2 units on a block there because of demand. So yes, this is the new norm, and as we heard, this development is actually on the lower end, and you can expect around that area higher density development on the basis of C147. So given that, I'm moving the motion because I don't think council has a lot of room to reject this application given our amendments there.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Setis, a seconder. Do you wish to add anything?
Yes, it's refreshing to see finding an application without reverse living, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Setis. Any other comments from councillors?
No.
If there's no further debate, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour of the recommendation? That item is carried. Members of the government, council has issued notice of decision. That's technically a permit for this application. All parties will be advised of council decision, and objectors will have a right of appeal 21 days of receipt of council's decision to go to VCAT should they choose to do so. Okay, we've dealt with items 5.11, 12, 13, 14, 15 and 16. We go to other business, councillors. And I do need to note that there's an urgent item being considered this evening, so if we can have someone move to include item 5.17. Move Councillor Setis, second Councillor Williams. All those in favour to consider it? Yes, that's been accepted. We'll now move to hear item 5.17. Do we have someone move and second that, please? Move Councillor Williams, second Councillor
Cetus, I'll put that to a vote.
Sorry. We've moved to accept it.
To accept it and now to consider
Onto the
it.
agenda, and now we're moving to hear it.
To hear it, yes.
And
yes.
councillors were not clear on what the vote was.
Okay, so we'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. We're now considering other business as an urgent item before 6.1, 5.17. Over to the officers, and you'll explain why it's urgent.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This does come up from time to time where plans are amended and then there's a notice of procedure undertaken through VCAT, and then council's got to form a view. In this case, there are more than 5 grounds of objection lodged with VCAT. So that means that this application, which was initially refused under delegation, can no longer be considered under delegation and requires a decision from this committee. The hearing is coming up the day after our next planning committee, and that's insufficient notice for council to advise all parties of its views. And the situation that the officer has assessed in this instance is the grounds for refusal have been largely addressed by revised plans. And the report before you takes the committee through what those changes are. And just to recap, the application that was refused sought approval for a 6-storey development, including 26 dwellings, 2 shops and 26 parking spaces. The amended plans reduce the dwelling unit by 25 dwellings. There remains the same amount of parking. So there remains 26 parking spaces. The officer's report on pages 2 and 3 of what's been circulated details the specific changes. I'd probably sum those up by saying they're really around improving the functionality of the previous design, which there were basic issues like really impractical access to rubbish collection, lift access, even the ability to get a bike in and out of the apartment was difficult under the previous version of plans. That's been addressed. There's also been considerable improvement to the internal amenity. There's lots of borrowed life in the previous proposal review. That's been addressed by the widening and improvement of light courts. There's also been an assessment of the application against the adopted version of Amendment C137. So both in terms of the height, so council's adopted height for this precinct is 6 storeys. This is 6 storeys. The setbacks also apply to the version adopted by council.
Thank you. Anything else to add, Darren? No? Questions from councillors? Councillor Cetus.
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor, I'd be curious to hear from Mr Rudd before it got to this point. What were the initial discussions prior to the original application being lodged in terms of the usual sort of toing and froings that occur, which is common practice between would-be applicants and our officers in terms of scoping, I suppose if I could use that term, for a would-be application. Was a height nominated at that particular point in time for them to, I suppose, have some reliance of moving forward in terms of them developing actual plans to come before council? I'd be curious about that part of the relationship between ourselves and them.
Mr Mayor, it's fair to say the initial application was so poor, and what officers try and do is get the application close to the level of compliance before notice is given. And that's so that when the residents receive an application or notification, that it's somewhere close to what the planning spec requires. The particular application that was refused by officers was very short of the mark. The applicant was given a chance through a request for further information, which highlighted where the deficiencies in the planning scheme. I've highlighted where those should come through in the introduction. Despite being advised, they failed to address those items to a level anywhere near compliance with the good and based upon that union, those applications were refused on the spot.
That begs a supplementary, Mr Mayor, on this point, because as I suspected, although you're too diplomatic, Mr Rudd, to have, I suppose, put your finger right on the nub of the problem, this is a classic example of gaming the system. They knew what was afoot, and yet they still had the intent to try and get what they wanted. And even now at the 11th hour, notwithstanding their application for an appeal, they're trying to get a unity ticket between us. And it's just outrageous. I mean,
are you arguing for or against?
Well, we haven't reached that point, but I think we need to tighten up our procedures in terms of the way these things actually progress up the line, either through here or in terms of our management thereof at VCAT afterwards, because, you know, the question will be asked even by VCAT panel members, well, why couldn't you get your act together, to put it politely, you know, early in the piece? So if this is going to be the kind of strategy that we're actually sending a signal out there for anyone who wishes to take us on, and we do understand that our processes are not, you know, too tough, sadly, because the dice is skewed against us. They're loaded against us, I should say. Okay. But this is appalling, really. It's not like as if Plenty Road has not been designated as
Is this a question, councillors?
Well,
is there a question here? We're asking questions.
I wouldn't mind us putting it to the vote.
I'll ask some questions in a moment. I'll ask some questions because it needs some clarity. Councillor Villala.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just through your question to the officers. I can't seem to find the exact reduction in parking spaces. It says a reduction, but could I just ask what would be the requirement under the respective halls and the overall reduction then? So there should be.
And arguably, there's an allocation to be made for the existing. So where the concession is under the planning standards for the shops.
What about visitor car parks?
And there's also an allocation. So it's not the full allocation of visitor
No, because.
car parks under the planning standard. There's 1 per 5 required. So there's a shortfall for in the visitor parking plus the commercial properties, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Lee.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Obviously, this is in line with the adopted Plenty Road amendment, which was done rather unusual circumstances. But I was curious to know about the 45 degrees site. From what I can recall, we adopted 30-degree site. Now it's presented with 45-degree site. Can we just get some comments around that?
Mr Mayor, anticipated that question. It's 45 degrees in that particular location. 30 degrees was adopted as planning standards.
So this 45 is okay for this.
I thought it was in regards to anything sensitive interfaces.
That's what Council adopted.
Well, councillors, we adopted.
That's what
Any other questions, councillors?
I'll be speaking against it, Mr Mayor, just for one.
Councillor Lawrence?
Just some clarity on that angle, 45 and 30. The 30-degree angle applies on one side of Plenty Road further up, doesn't it?
The 30 degrees is really around the Tile Street
Yes,
area.
so this is lower. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. We have a recommendation there, councillors.
I'll move it, reluctantly.
Actually, we've not had a request. Were they actually invited to speak or not?
But it was an urgent business item.
Darren, were people asked to present tonight or not? If
I certainly have people on the list, Mr Mayor.
not on my list.
What do we need to?
Mr Mayor, I have Joe Corbett and...
I'm happy to accept.
Sorry,
I beg your pardon. Yes.
15, yeah.
Okay. Joe, if you would like to join us, please. Joe or Wazora or both. I do apologise. You've been waiting patiently there, and now they've seen how we conduct.
So we've got 5 minutes between you two, so 2.5 minutes each. Okay, thank you.
Can I just say, I appreciate the comments in relation to gamesmanship that's going to play as far as this application goes and the commission application so forth. And congratulate council on just saying straight out it's not good enough. But we have seen an initial plan that we put in our objections for. We then saw a second plan that we were not able to put in our objections for because it was already going to VCAT. And now we were informed on Friday afternoon, somebody by phone calls or by email, to appear today. And in today's mail we received some more documentation about the grounds in relation to the changes that have been made. So the first time that we've really heard substantially anything about the changes that have been made to these plans is this afternoon by Express Post. We haven't had a chance to look at this documentation in any great degree and to understand what those changes are that have been made. So I want to really cursory look at the documentation. I'll make a few points. It appears as if there is a requirement for there to be 34 spaces provided for car parking, and that's the parking for the 2 offices. They aren't going to be shop fronts. There's two offices with one toilet between the 2 of them. And so that there's only going to be 1 staff parking space for each of those offices so only 2 spots. So a total requirement would be of 34 spaces, of course, going to be according to the planning requirements, and only 26 in total are going to be divided. There was we had concern in relation to the traffic in the laneway, with that number of units being developed that would be accessed through that laneway, and that laneway has got residents that are facing, whose front doors face that laneway. And there was a traffic survey that was conducted. It appears that survey was conducted during school holidays, with notations about that during school holidays traffic is really reduced only by 10%, and therefore the figures would remain low. And I would argue that traffic is much more greatly reduced than just 10% during school holidays. We do have issues in relation to the angle of the setback. I understand now that there's not...
Your time's up. If you want to continue, it means less for your colleague to speak.
First of all, about the whole process and the flow of information, the time of getting information. We actually commend council for its original refusal of this proposal, and we would like to see council continue its refusal of this proposal. If people have visited that site, we know the 6-storey development is within the guidelines. There surely is a question of whether it's appropriate and desirable for particular locations. This development, 6 stories, 25 units, all the cars feed on out at the T intersection of 2 laneways, which will create problems. That laneway is also used as a pedestrian walk through to public transport. It's actually close to 2 busy streets, Murray Road and Plenty Road, and the exit of the car park is at the T intersection. We continue to have concerns about the traffic and also parking in particular, a reduction of the car spaces from 34 to 26. Also the notion of using car stacking, triple car stacking. Now that might be a satisfactory solution where residents have no other option but to use triple level car stacking. But when there is an option of using nearby streets, what's going to happen? In particular on quick drop-ins to home. And that will actually put pressure on the one nearby street, Beecham Street, which is already under pressure from car parking. And there'll be a spillover. I think it actually creates a bad precedent, this development, in terms of its suitability for that particular location. We recognise that overall there are areas along Plenty Road that do approval for 6-storey development. But if you visit this location, you will quickly realise there are already just 2 new developments of 9 2-storey units feeding into that laneway. And here we have now potentially another 5 vehicles feeding into that laneway. We sort of are really keen for council to much more make a stronger case that this is still not an adequate proposal.
Thank you for that, Joe. You guys have finished. You can resume.
3 other objectives for who will be present.
That's fine. No problem. Okay. So thank you. You guys can resume your seat. Councillor.
I've got a procedural question, Mr. Mayor. Is this for asking council to form a view, or is it are we actually deciding on this particular application? Because I don't see the the particular report as particularly comprehensive compared to other planning application reports.
No, but Mr. Mayor, if you look at the first sentence under recommendation,
We supported
we're
It's the
supporting.
form of view.
We're supporting
the forthcoming
to support
appeal.
the appeal
plans.
with subject to conditions.
So it's to form a view, essentially, not to assess the application in its entirety.
Form of view.
Mr. Rudd?
The application's been assessed as to form a view
Right.
on the amended plans specifically.
Yeah.
That being the case, I'll just put an alternative motion to.
But not before, because I foreshadowed moving.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. You go ahead.
Councillor McCarthy has a question.
I just wanted to just to get clarification now that we've had a chance to hear from the objectors as well. What is the status of the of Council's planning scheme amendment in relation to this site? This comes under C137, if I'm correct. What is the status in relation to how Council should deal with this application?
Mr Mayor, in this particular instance, there's been very little degree of change. There's also the case law that says if an amendment is adopted, it's to be seriously entertained, and that's the language that the tribunal use.
Yes.
Where the tribunal may not use that or cast some doubt over a planning scheme amendment that's adopted, if there's variation from a panel recommendation to what the council adopted, that can occur sometimes. In this case, it hasn't regarding this particular reason. It's been the same height throughout,
So just
setback throughout.
sorry, yeah, I just wanted to clarify that point. So the panel the recommendation from panel and the final planning scheme amendment that was adopted by a majority of council last year is consistent enough that it would be considered serious, if that's correct. That's what I've heard.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to get a picture on that one.
Okay.
And
Sorry.
that's fine.
Councillor Seeders?
No, Councillor Seeders put out of it first.
You're moving?
Yep.
The recommendation?
Need a seconder.
Is there a seconder?
Sorry, to accept the.
What's here? Yep.
Right.
Is there a seconder?
I'll second it so that we actually move
Right.
forward
Okay.
and people vote on it.
So, Councillor Seeders, you have the floor.
The temptation here is just reject it outright, just as a matter of principle. Unfortunately, VCAT doesn't work that way. They're more concerned with outcomes than they are about processes as clumsy as these are before us, because what it is, and I'll go back to my points before, this is a classic example of gaming the system. So why does a victory, and I say that in inverted commas, why does a victory on our part smell like defeat? So we've been able to force them in order to trigger an appeal on the basis of a reduced height, which they could have gotten all along if they had been a little bit more flexible from the outset, which is rather ironic. So where does that leave us? It leaves us forming what it appears to be a unity ticket, because the first sentence there on page 3 makes it pretty explicit. We're not going there to fight them, we're there to support the appeal. Rather ironic. So it feels like a bit of a letdown. But the basic premise must not be lost on us here, and that is that Plenty Road has been earmarked as an area for intensification. Now, adopted or seriously entertained otherwise, the fact is we've gone through quite an extensive community consultation process. I take the points from the objectors in relation to the access and egress to the proposed building, the reduction in car parking, but really the car parking reductions are rather piecemeal considering what has come before us here, anything up to about 60 to 70, if not 80% reduction. And why? Because they're right centre along those transport corridors and can hang their hat in terms of doing away with the requisite requirement for car parking. We know that. So we don't have much in the way of too many tools that we can use to combat these applications. So I just want to sort of put things in perspective that I think what we need to do is ensure that we've got good faith negotiations going forward with proposed developers, and not thinking that they can get away with what they view as an outcome that will suit, essentially the economics of their proposal. We're not here to rework their proposal, and I doubt that VCAT is in the business of reworking their proposal either. So in some respects, we should rely on the good sense of VCAT to knock it out altogether if it's that poor. But bearing in mind the history of this, the fact that it did reject it in the first instance, they're coming back now, and with the responsible authority coming in to support, because it's come down, and adhered to the original arguments that we had put at that original hearing, has to be taken into some perspective. I know people here probably won't support it, but I just wanted to put that on the table for us to consider that really, when you look at the history, we don't have much to fight for. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Service. Councillor Lawrence, a second, anything to add?
Look, I don't have anything in front of me to give reason to make a modification to this application. I understand we're now in that kind of mediation and bargaining point that goes on at VCAT. But I did listen carefully to the residents, the objectors, and they still seem to be imploring us to reject it outright. Now, I would think at this point of the game we're either locking in the reductions as they are or forming a view about further. But there wasn't anything further that I could see to put forward.
No.
Okay, speakers for or against? Councillor Lee.
I'll speak against, I think. As foreshadowed earlier, I do intend to put in an alternate motion for refusing this particular amendment should the current recommendation fail to carry. What I see before me is an overreach of the site. Bearing in mind that while C137 was adopted, and we all know that we didn't all unanimously adopt it in that, because we believe there's further work that could be done in terms of the 45 versus 30 degree setback. But nonetheless, the 45 degrees was adopted, and that was the will of the council. However, that's the maximum allowable limit. Same as the 6 stories, that's the maximum allowable limit. Just because you can go up to 6 doesn't mean you have to go up to 6. Just because you can have 45 degrees doesn't mean you have to have 45 degrees setback. What particularly worries me about this application is the reamassing of the particular development. If you look at one of the drawings, Unit 17, 11 and 5, there's ample opportunity for the developer to push these further towards the Plenty Road front and therefore reduce the amenity impact to the proposed development abutting the laneway without affecting their yield, without affecting the overall internal amenity. Because let's face it, by deleting one dwelling somehow magically addresses the 12 conditions as outlined in page 12, plus all the other neighbourhood impact amenities, is ludicrous. And if the applicant is serious about having a proper response to residents' concerns, they would have had the common courtesy of fronting up to the planning committee and explain things in good faith. What we're seeing here is just flying a kite, trying to get us to buy in, and I'm not going to fall for it.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers?
I just want to get a clarification on something before I speak. Councillor Sevis made reference in his opening comments about a reduction in the height. And I just want to make clear that there is no reduction in the height.
No parking.
Or did I mishear that?
No, well, Mr Rudd explained the changes that they made. That's what we're supporting.
Reduction.
Yeah. So then I'll speak against it, and I won't sort of repeat the words that Councillor Lee has said, but I want to pick up something that one of the objectors said, which I think is really important to note. This is a poorly thought through development on a whole range of fronts. It might tick the boxes in some aspects of the planning scheme amendment, which is yet to be formally adopted by the Minister. So it still is open to change. But significantly, you have a development here which is reliant upon a car stacker system, which we know and we have seen in action in Westgarth and other parts of the city, which delivers a significant increase in on-street parking because the damn things just don't work. And I would say, and I don't usually go into the aesthetics of these sorts of developments, but I'm going to go there on this one because this is probably one of the ugliest things that I've seen proposed in this chamber in a long time.
And that's saying something.
And I've seen some ugly things proposed. So if I'm going to go out on a limb and get behind a development that delivers housing diversity, I'm not so sure this does, appropriate density in the right places, I'm not so sure this does. It's got to be of an exemplary design standard that delivers a whole range of other things, and this just doesn't cut it on process grounds, on outcome grounds, and I think we would be foolhardy to go down the path of playing the game. And I find it confounding that that residents have been put in the situation that they have been, having to scramble quickly to put their case. And I think we need to recognise that they've brought to our attention some of the deficiencies in the application, even in its amended proposal.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
I'd like to speak
Councillor
against
Williams.
also. I feel, looking at what is existing in Plenty Road at the moment, I find that this is an overdevelopment. You're looking at the sensitive interface behind it, which I think is this development will totally affect all the sensitive interface, particularly one coming off the laneway there. It's got a huge visual bulk for the area, and the neighbourhood character will be completely changed with this 6-storey, especially with the 40-degree setback. 45, sorry.
Okay. Any other speakers? If not, the mover can close the debate if he chooses to do so.
Just briefly, I know unpalatable, but we've been in this situation before, Mr. Mayor, and I think a degree of pragmatism sometimes in this business works because, you know, I'm not sure whether the attitudes change there.
You're closing the debate. No new items. Just finish off.
Modifications have been advanced and supported by our officers. And that's where we're at.
All right, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour of the recommendation, please raise your hands. Those against? That motion is lost. Do we have an alternative recommendation?
The alternative recommendation is
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The alternative recommendation is to refuse to support the amended plans at the upcoming DCAT hearing.
Reasons?
I don't think we need to.
No, we don't. I beg your pardon. No. So we have a mover here to not support, seconded by Councillor Williams. If there's no debate or comment, I'll put that to vote. All those in favour? And against? Carried. Okay, Council will now form a view of not supporting the recommendation, and that we will present that case at VCAT. Thank you for involvement there, members of the gallery. Okay, we now have other business still to consider. 6.1. So the item B. Move Councillor Surdis. Second Councillor Greco. All those in any discussion? No. I'll put it to a vote. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you. That concludes tonight's meeting. Can councillors just stay back for one moment?
Yes.
Just for one moment. When the gallery's vacated the chambers, we'll join you outside in a moment.